Okay, welcome to another episode of the AI in Manufacturing podcast here on Industry Forward TV. I'm your host, Kudzai Manditereza. Today, we'll discuss AI agents for industrial sales and application engineers. My guest on this episode is Fay Goldstein, who is the co-founder and CEO of Folio. Fay, welcome. It's great
Thank
to have
you.
you on the show today.
Great to be here. I've been an avid listener of a lot of your episodes, and I learn something new every episode. So I'm really excited to be here and hopefully share something new to the rest of your listeners as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So maybe to kick things off here, could you, introduce yourself to our audience and tell us a bit, of a background about Folio?
Sure. Well, my name is Faye. We're building Folio, and we're building out agents specifically for industrial sales and application engineers, like you had mentioned. And I started getting into this world actually back in college. I was working in my best friend's uncle's automotive condenser and compressor shop. And they were repairing all these AC condensers and compressors for all these different models of cars. And I was tasked as summer and weekend jobs of taking all of those condensers and compressors, writing out all those specs, writing out all the benefits, and then at that point was putting it up on their eBay site because they realized they were making more money selling these parts than they were refurbishing these parts. And they needed someone that could basically write all of these technical specs and the technical benefits out. And that was kind of my first touch point into this world. And then I shifted into another space in the automotive world, working with telematics data. And there I was also working with some of the larger OEMs about using and optimizing the data for the company I was working for was dealing with cybersecurity, predictive maintenance, and insurance. And I realized that there was this huge opportunity, both of dealing with this customer facing sales opportunity, but also this huge amount of information we can get from the data of either parts or components, and in the industrial space in general. And I kind of combined those two loves, recognizing now that AI can do all of that work that I was doing in college, writing manually all of this sales information, all of these spec information, understanding how to explain the difference between this condenser and this condenser, this compressor and this compressor. It can help me optimize on that. And for companies, especially ones that have heavy technical products with large product portfolios, hence the name Folio, that's a lot of information for an average sales engineer or even an above average sales engineer to handle. And that's where we come into play. We say, let's take all of this data, all of this information, all of these specs, and help optimize the ability to engage with that. And so that's what we're doing with Folio.
Awesome stuff. I'm really looking forward to unpacking all of that, with you today here. So, but I would like us to kind of like take a step back here, first of all, and set the context for our audience here. Let's start with a deep understanding of the current landscape. What are some of the challenges with the traditional way industrial sales and application engineering teams operate right now?
So let's first talk about kind of who's the audience that we're speaking about. We're speaking about pretty heavily technical products right now. We are a manufacturer. We've got a line of food manufacturing. We've got conveyor systems, and those conveyor systems and our manufacturing system, and we're building out. Let's say we're producing. What's your favorite snack, Kudzai? Let's just do a snack.
Well, some Lay's. I don't know if you have got
Lay's,
those.
great.
Yeah.
Lay's. Okay. Now we are producing these chips, and obviously, if our chips become micro-sized chips, our customers are not going to be very happy, right? If we're making all of these Lay's potato chips, or I think you call it something different in the UK, chips, if they come out on the wrong size, our customers are not going to be happy. What do we need to do? We need to add in some sort of vision sensor onto the machine and onto the conveyor and onto that process. Now, we already have this conveyor system. We already have our entire operating line happening right there, creating these snacks. And we need to add in an additional sensor, an additional industrial component. How do we know which one makes sense? How do we know how the distance? How do we know which one actually would fit for the necessary needs? And if my Lay's chip making plant of all my snacks is in Alaska, maybe I need to be considering the temperature of the space. Maybe if that all is also connected into the bagging system, I need to be considering how are those PLC codes of all of the different sensors going to interact with each other. If I'm going in and I'm trying to plug it into a different type of system, and I want to connect it also to, let's say, a Siemens sensor, and then I want to connect it into a different type of conveyor system. All of those questions are typically what a seller or a sales representative would need to go back to an engineer. We need to go back to the product manager of that specific sensor. And that's a lot of lag time and a lot of waiting. Where's that information sitting? Which sensor makes sense, which ones make sense if it's this distance or this size or this use case. All of that information is sitting typically in tons of data sheets, tons of PDFs, tons of old documentation, or even newer documentation, but the back and forth. And what we've realized is that back and forth is losing money. We're losing money not just because it takes me longer to answer because I've got to wait for Bob, who's in charge of that specific sensor, to be able to answer about that specific sensor's details and documentation and specifications. I'm also not necessarily thinking of potentially the newer products, right? We may have a sensor that I, as a sales representative, don't know yet and don't know well enough. And I'm not going to think about that automatically because I'm used to selling what I know. And so what we realize is this mix between two problems in this world about data. We're talking about, number one, is there is an overwhelming amount of technical specification and data that is required in order to sell and to implement industrial products, is one problem. And then we've got a second data problem, is that all of this loop of, let's say I tell you, hey, Mr. Guy that's building these lathes, here's what I suggest. And you say, no, actually, here's this issue we've had. All of that back and forth interactions, which is really powerful data that should be going back into later stage product decisions, is lost because that's sitting in back and forth conversation, emails, etc. And so that two data problem, too much data, and then not enough memory of that data is really causing a lot of lost sales, lost revenue, and mistakes. And when we're talking about not necessarily making potato chips, but we're talking about selling an industrial vision sensor to a airplane or selling specific landing gear to Boeing, we're talking about very big, costly mistakes. And so what we are really thinking about is how can we make sure that those sales engineers, the applications engineers, are able to understand the customer use cases, the nuances, and be able to very quickly query their massive product portfolio and technical product portfolio in order to get the answers that they need and to make that connection.
Awesome. I mean, it's just incredible when you sort of like put it into perspective, kind of like the whole, sort of like challenge, or a lot of things that need to go, a lot of factors that go into, really coming up with a solution for something as simple as a sensor, right? Now, I mean, given those challenges, how does an AI-enabled approach change things? And in other words, can you describe what becomes possible now that wasn't before?
How quickly can you read? That's the question we want to ask ourselves. How quickly can I go through 700 pages of documentation? How quickly can I make in my brain the connection between this industrial sensor and the connection it might have to this specific industrial machine? How quickly can I understand the nuances of the compliance of that specific product and that specific customer? Now, human brains, no matter how intelligent we are, and some of us are fantastically intelligent like yourself, there's still a limitation about how much information we could retain, how many connections we can make automatically, especially when we're standing there on a Zoom call or in person with a customer, right? There's quite not just not enough of ability that we can have, but that's where AI comes into play. When we're taking, and that's the power of AI, is it ingests an insane amounts of data and can very quickly query that data and give the answers that's absolutely necessary of it. Now, companies have been doing this in many different spaces. What it really needs to understand, and really where we're focusing our efforts are on, how do we make sure that this knowledge and this information is understood not just as knowledge and information, but as industrial knowledge and information, the applications that are very nuanced applications. And that's also where AI comes into play, is that once it learns and continues to learn and iterate on information and iterate on, again, that engagement, there is so much opportunity for it to not just know the data and answer the information and find that information really, really quick, but to also help make those connections to the applications and the use cases that is necessary. And as general model, as models become more advanced and more advanced, and the knowledge graphs become more advanced, and we move from, let's say, from vector to graph knowledge bases, we're talking about the ability to have interactions and interconnections between these different data points and be able to understand kind of the big holistic picture. What changes now is simply that people can find answers, take actions, and have agentic experiences that are actually doing those actions on that data in a way that they never were able to before. We're supercharging these applications engineers to do things that would have taken them hours, days, and costly mistakes.
Awesome stuff. So maybe to kind of like make this more tangible, let's talk about Folio, which is your product or suite of products. So maybe can you kind of like just describe exactly for us what exactly is, Folio, what's the core problem that you're solving for, and maybe from a user's perspective, how would like a typical day look different for a manufacturer or distributor using it?
Yeah. So Folio really is our goal is to become the co-pilot or like sidekick or the expert assistant for these application engineers right now. That they are having customer conversations, they're engaging with customers in the field, they're standing at a trade show answering questions, they're going to the actual manufacturing plant and trying to engage and sell these products, or they're sitting back at the office and they're the product engineer, the application engineer tasked with answering the questions for their 150 distributors, right, that are having all of these products. Or you're a distributor that have 30 different product lines. Each of those product lines has 120 something different products with thousands and thousands of different technical pieces of information. Folio, now you can just dump your data sheets, dump your specification guides, dump the operational manuals, anything that is in what's called unstructured data, right? It's sitting in a PDF, it's sitting in images, it's sitting in some sort of documentation form. And so that's unstructured data. And you can also connect your systems. If you have an ERP, you have a PIM, you have a CRM, you can also connect those systems. Folio looks at those pieces of information. And the wow factor here is really just so many times industrial companies are like, well, I don't want to connect my ERP. That's so much. I have to worry about all my data being clean and making sure my ERP is organized before I start using AI on top of it. And we say, no. Don't stress about clean data so much. Don't stress about making sure everything's organized. Let's start with what you already have. All of that information that's sitting on your website that currently now, when you're trying to answer a customer question, you're either having to remember it. You have to go to the guy that knows it way better than you, or you're going to a website, your website, clicking through all of those step by step until you get, okay, this product, this specification, this need, and then you get down and then you have to download a data sheet in order to understand it. Or saying, no, dump it into Folio. Folio's AI breaks down all of those pieces into a vector knowledge base, breaks it down so that no longer do you have to build out some sort of a traditional type of search that you're searching by keywords. It understands it by semantic search. It goes in and understands really all of the information that's sitting there. And you're able to now, as a sales engineer, as an application engineer, as a technical rep, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of these in the United States alone that are very expensive sales representatives, are able to just simply ask a question. Like it's a chat GPT almost for themselves, trained on their knowledge, trained on who they are as a sales engineer, trained on exactly what their customer specifically needs, ask the questions, get immediate answers, and then do actions on top of it. So compare this competitor's product to our product, and then write a one-pager that can explain that to the customer and why it makes sense for them to switch to us. Simple things like that. Or take these specs and understand and analyze what the compliance requirements might be for this specific sensor. Or this is the system my customer has. They're sitting in, again, Alaska. They're trying to electrify their rail system. Which of our 100,000 products makes sense for this specific use case? And so now those guys are supercharged because AI can look into all that information and understand it and then give them the answer. So right now it feels like a chat interface that's just super smart and very focused on industrial components. And in the future, again, we're learning from a lot of that loop. So if your customers, and we're building out that right now, if you're a seller, you have an interface. Soon your distributors will be able to engage and also help sell for products. And then soon your customers will also be able to engage with that data. So if your customers have a question, they can just chat into and engage with the products that they've purchased and get the answers right then and there, so they also don't have to wait for all those responses. So your customer experience is even better as well. And so soon all of those interactions are then captured. And that's a lot. That's that new data. Again, when we talk about those two forms of data, too much data and not enough knowledge about what really works, all that can then loop back around into product decisions, strategy decisions. If you keep on having to say, sorry, no, we don't have a sensor that works for those temperatures in Alaska, that's really important for your product guys and your strategy guys to know maybe we should be building a sensor that can do that. And so that's kind of where we're moving with Folio and how we're approaching it.
Awesome. I mean, so it sounds to me like it's more of an sort of like an open-ended interactive platform with which you could engage. But do you have like some templates also as part of your system? Because I would imagine customers want that repeatability of all these
Yes.
processes within that platform.
100%. So we have what's called rules, really, is that we're building the ability for every company to either create rules for their company, meaning if you are building a quote, always have this is the header, this is the footer, this is these things, here's the price list, or user-based rules. So for example, when let's say our sales rep in Germany is engaging, always answer him and create assets in German, right? That's a huge value. Those are user-based rules that we're also enabling. So what we've realized is templates are kind of old school thinking. At first, we had started thinking about templates, right? We had first started thinking, let's design all these templates. And in fact, our first product was about templates. We had built one Folio product initially, and it was this really nice proposal template creator. And we realized we're building it for a modern AI first world. Why are we not allowing the freedom of our users to be able to engage as they need and be able to build their own rules, build their own interaction? So for example, one of our customers I was just speaking to today, he said, you know what? I actually really want that on every bottom of every asset and PDF that's created, I want it to link to the actual purchasing page that allows them to go and make those purchases. We're like, okay, no problem. Let's go ahead and add it to the rule. And then soon, with Folio, we're actually building it out as agentic experiences. And so templates would limit those agentic experiences in a sense. What makes more sense to say, I want my agent to now go and do X, Y, Z actions on top of this information. So for example, and this is not happening yet, but we're getting there soon. I want to be able to create a quote for this specific customer or do a configuration guide, a custom configuration guide for the specific customer, go ahead and actually send that to that customer via email and then log it into my CRM, right? We have a lot of opportunities to build different experiences. And instead of building static templates, we'll be able to be building soon very structured agentic experiences that can be controlled and managed and owned by each individual customer.
Awesome. So as far as sort of like, collecting all of the data, I know you mentioned that they need to kind of like get every piece of information they've got out there and sort of like put it into your platform. I want us to talk about the experience of that, data collection. How does it work? So as you mentioned, some of the data may be coming from an ERP system. So maybe there's an API integration. Some of it is data sheets, PDF. Can you talk to us about that experience of data collection? What sort of,
It's interesting because I think one of the scariest things for some industrials, really any company, is like, oh, this is such a huge undertaking. I have to now give access to this and give access to this and clean up this and do this and plug in all this information. And at first, when we started building Folio, we were like, well, the best way for us to get this information is to connect into an ERP. So let's build this out API first. We can connect into our ERP and pull it. And we did. And we built it API first. We can connect into anything. Soon we're building out MCPs also to connect into any relevant portal or product that has structured data already. But when we started actually speaking to customers, we realized that was a huge, massive enterprise play, right? It was like, let's get signed, let's give access to data, let's make sure that this is a approved vendor, let's go through this huge, long process. And then everyone's thinking, well, I don't know right now if I'm willing to sign a huge, massive contract and open this up to everything. And what we realized was that there is so much valuable information that's sitting in publicly available information on your website, all that stuff that's your day-to-day sales guys, when they're in the field, they're not going into your ERP. In the end of the day, they're sitting there and they're downloading a bunch of stuff onto their desktop or onto their mobile, and they're sitting there and scrolling. So why are we building something? And it's ready to rock and roll for those that do want enterprise contracts, that do want to connect their ERPs, it's ready. But what we've realized now is we wanted to build Folio to feel like the consumer experience people are having with their AI tools right now. Because when we spoke to sales representatives and we were talking to them about the AI tools they loved and liked, it wasn't their internal AI tool that was connected into their massive ERP. It was the one that they're sitting and using on their phone day to day to help them draft their emails, right? And so what we realized is we can give that same experience without demanding a huge, massive undertaking in getting all this data embedded. Again, it's just dump your data sheets, dump your guides. Most of that stuff is sitting in some internal portal in folder systems that guys have to click 10 times in order to get to the right one, right? Instead, now dump it into Folio and it becomes accessible in the palm of your engineer's hands. And it's a very much, I think, a different approach to how to build industrial AI. Right? There are incredible companies that are building huge, massive, strategic, year-long, 2-year-long, 3-year-long projects, which are important and powerful. But I think that there are easier ways right now to just get started. And I think once you just get started, especially with something like Folio, which is not a huge, massive undertaking, we're building this the way we would want to experience it as smart, savvy, young millennial product users. We're building it in that sense so that smart, savvy product users in the industrial space would actually want to engage with it. And I think that's something that's unique. And I don't think a lot of folks, understand in a sense of the power of that. In when we're speaking to industrials and we say how easy it is, they're like, really? That's it? That's all you need right now to get started, and that's it. You just need to dump some of your data sheets to get started, and you already see value within the first minute and a half of starting to use Folio. There's no long contracting. There's no long let's connect into these things. It's let's dump and let's go.
Awesome. So maybe to explore a bit the engine behind your solution, can you sort of like break down sort of the core components of the platform that does the data processing and this intelligent generation?
Yeah, so we basically have broken it down into 3 parts. One is the intelligent knowledge base, right? That means that when we're dumping these data sheets and you're putting in your configuration guides, you're putting in your product images, you're putting in your CAD drawings, you're putting in all these things, how does Folio understand those things? So we've built an intelligent knowledge base that's basically able to take all of that data and chunk it into specific sections, embed it into a vector knowledge base, and it basically is able to understand them in very, very small different pieces. And I'm saying this in a little bit of a generic terms so that your users are able to understand a little bit, or your listeners are able to understand a little bit these concepts. Because I think, again, that's one of the big scary things is like, I don't know AI. These are all really big, heavy terms. These are all really big, scary concepts. How do I even know if I can make this decision for my company? And we're just like, let's just put it down onto a basic level. You've got a lot of information. You now have a genius assistant that knows how to file it really, really, really well. And then when you call that assistant and be like, hey, find me this, they find it in a few seconds. That's the concept. So we've got the vector knowledge bases breaking down and embedding the knowledge that's coming from the unstructured documentation into, at that point, now structured information. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to tag it. You don't have to organize it. You don't have to build it into tables. You don't have to really touch it. You can just dump it. That's part 1. Part 2 is a fine-tuned LLM that we're right now using a regular model, but we're fine-tuning it to be an industrial applications engineer, meaning it's trained to understand what does an applications engineer care about in specs. Understand that. And we're also building out soon smaller language models. So not just large language models, but smaller language models that are fine-tuned and really trained to understand CAD drawings, to understand engineering drawings, to understand certain structural information, to understand PLC code, et cetera. All of those will be grouped together into, and those are kind of the more of the language model level. And then on top of that, we're building out the actions that you can take once you have the knowledge and you have an AI that's understanding how to engage with that knowledge, meaning you're searching through it and it's looking at all that information and pulling out the right information for you. You then have to do something with that information. And so that's where the agents come into play. So we have different agentic experience that can do actions, whether that could be create me a PDF or write me this overview or go in and do XYZ in my ZYX system. And so I would say it's kind of that 3-part: knowledge, AI, and then actions on top of that. And we're building that into kind of a few different layers. So we're first now find information that you need find the information that makes sense for you. Then you can actually go ahead and do something with that information, create assets, create your data sheets, your documentation, and then soon it would also be automate processes and automate certain things. And that's kind of how we're thinking about it, is the AI is able to help you do all of those, find, create, and automate workflows in the industrial knowledge and engineering space.
So maybe let's talk about the deployment of this solution. What form, is it, deployed? Do you also host the LLM on site? What infrastructure is required for that? Can you speak to us more about that?
Yeah, so you want to dive deep into the actual infrastructure. We're using the information. We've kind of dividing the data, obviously, because we need to ensure that there's not an overlap, right? If we have one customer using it and their competitor is also using Folio, we have to make sure that there's not an overlap in how that data interacts with each other. So every customer and every user of Folio has a way that the model itself is fine-tuned to interact or to act as a specific persona or a specific understanding. And this is your applications engineer. Now, because of the way that we're building the data layer, it interacts with the data, which is your company data, your spec data, all of this information in a separate space. So this might be a model that understands the broader holistic landscape of industrial applications. But your information and that data loop of understanding how does your information, that stays only within your park and your area. Now we are using just typical cloud infrastructure, secure. We're using right now, we're actually running our main model right now is Gemini. We're using Google's Gemini right now, but there's plug and play, right? There's an ability, and you have to, when you're building in this space, you have to have the ability to, if there's a better model that comes out, we got to do that. If we end up deciding we want to build and fine tune and build our own model, right? Eventually we have so much information, it makes sense to build our own industrial model. We have the ability to do that. We want to plug in multimodal, right? We realize there's so much information that's coming from visuals or coming from video. We have the ability to do that. So we've built the architecture in a way that you can plug and play as necessary and as needed. And we've also built it in a way that the information and the data is separated in very, very specific areas so that there isn't an overlap. That if your Folio is learning from your customer questions, your competitor doesn't get that information. And if that competitor is learning and their AI is understanding and switching things and iterating things, that doesn't loop back from you. We've built it in very, very separate kind of worlds into how the data is interacting with other data.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the other topic that I wanted to talk about is this idea. As you may know, it's one of the big topics around AI adoption is can we really trust it? Obviously, we've got all this fancy AI behind, but taking into account the risks involved here, like can we trust it? And if something happens, who is accountable for this? How does Folio sort of like balance that automation and with trust and accountability as far as recommending to the sales engineers is concerned?
100%. So one of the things we realized very, very, very early on was that we needed to give what's called grounded answers. We needed to, and that's really what makes what's Folio is very focused on, is we're contextualizing your data really only. It's like it looks into your data sheets. It looks into the things that you're adding into your knowledge base. It's looking, we're calling the knowledge base the vault. It's looking into your information that's sitting in there. And when it's giving you the answer, it's also showing exactly where it found the answer. It's giving the data sheet it pulled it from. It's giving the configuration guides it's pulling it from. It's giving those grounded answers and showing you exactly where it's from. We also recognize that there's still a need sometimes for having a human in the loop. And one of the additional things that we're doing is recognizing, specifically now in these earlier days of AI, where people are still a little bit hesitant, is the ability to loop in, let's say, the guy that's in charge of doing feasibility checks. Add him into the chat, add him into this interaction that you're having, and having this human in the loop with the AI is a really powerful thing for us to be able to offer customers. So for example, if you are a sales engineer, and let's say you're a new entry-level sales engineer, and you are engaging with Folio in the chat, and it's giving you an answer, and you're like, okay, I see the answer, I see it verified there, but I don't necessarily have the permission. In the past, you'd have to go find the guy, you'd email him, you'd say, here's this, you'd have to write up an entire kind of conversation, explain and double verify. And it might not be one guy, it might be like two guys. And that guy might have gone on vacation, so he might not even be there to help you verify it. Now you can go and engage and loop someone into the chat itself and say, hey, this is the answer. Can you do a feasibility check? And so have the ability to engage a human in the loop is we're hearing is important. That being said, it's getting better and better and better. And because Folio specifically learns from the interactions, the more that our customers use Folio, the better and tighter it becomes in its responses. The more it understands the nuances of the specific customer, the specific needs, the way that they interact with their customers, the way that they look and understand the applications of their industrial products. And so with usage, it actually becomes smarter and becomes better and becomes tighter in terms of the results. Still now, we encourage that people remember that both people make mistakes and AI can make mistakes. And we're recognizing, engage with the people that are experts on your team. Play around, use Folio for getting the answers and getting the information that you need. But if you have a doubt, you can always go back to see the reference, to see the grounded information, to go back manually to the data sheet. You just click it, it opens it up, and you can see exactly where it pulled it from. So you're able to go ahead and do that. And I think we'll get to a point, and we're seeing it already. We're seeing it already with the catastrophic mistakes that humans have made. And we're talking about millions of lives and millions of dollars. Well, hundreds of lives, millions of dollars with human mistakes. And we're seeing opposite of what you're saying. We're seeing the opportunity for AI to reduce those mistakes because it's just pulling from data. It's pulling from real information. It's pulling from the specs. It's pulling from this grounded source of truth. And there's a way less likelihood of making very costly and tragic mistakes when you're using AI rather than only relying on human memory, human knowledge. And I think there's really opportunity, actually, rather than fear in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, just to kind of like talk a bit more about, the governance around, do you ever, get a scenario where maybe a customer has got some set of documents that they want only to be available to a certain group of people, maybe managers? And if so, are you able to handle that within the platform, that governance?
Yes, 100%. That's something that we realized actually also early on, was that especially if you're an OEM and you have your direct sales engineers, those are the guys that are in your team, they know your information. For example, test documentation. We have a customer that we're working with. They have internal test documentation that they only share for customers that are already signing NDAs, that are already engaging with information, that they're able to see the results of those tests on those specific industrial connectors. And then they have publicly available tests that are on their website that anyone can see. And so that was a big question they asked us. They said, how can we make sure that if the customer or sales representative is asking and they're getting an answer, that they know that they can share that publicly or that it's not? And that's really also where a very smart and intelligent knowledge base comes into play. And so we've built our knowledge base to be able to understand permissions and levels of permissions in terms of how to engage that data. We also see it now. We're building Folio from the ground up. And I think what makes us really different is understanding the nuances of the sales interactions in this space. That you have an OEM that sells with distributors, that might engage a system integrator, that then sells to the customer. And the way the customer engages with that data might look different if that customer person engaging with it is an engineer versus if they're the procurement guy. All of that interactions is something that's really important to understand when you're building software. And that's why I believe vertical AI is super powerful, because we're building the permissions and the roles into Folio from the ground to understand these nuances in the way that this industry works, which is really a unique thing, which is why it's not just using any of these older or broader generic AI tools. This understands that your distributor that might be actually in a different country might have different product information they might need to be able to look to because of, let's say, the regulations, or the pricing eventually of this specific thing might be changing because they've got the tariffs. So there's a lot of knowledge that needs to go into play. And that's, again, a lot of connections that a person typically now has to do. And that's what we're building Folio for, is to help make those connections, help understand those nuances, and build out, again, the interfaces that enable it to feel seamless. So it still just feels like a chat. And in the background, all of that craziness is happening. But it feels like you're just chatting with your AI assistant. It's just an AI assistant that really knows you, really knows your company, really knows everything it needs to know, and will only give you grounded answers.
Okay, so I mean, for leaders who are listening to this, conversation, who are thinking we want this solution, what does a typical implementation journey look like from the time they engage you, and how quickly can they expect to see value?
If they have their data sheets accessible, which most of them do, it's on their website. We can even pull them for them. Implementation takes about 20 minutes. That's literally what we're building for. We're building for this to be a quick decision, a decision that you can plug and play and see value, honestly, within the next 2 minutes after starting to use Folio, because you're already getting the answers that would have taken you 2 hours to find. You can get it within the first 2 minutes. And we're building Folio, again, the way that we as product users use product. We're building it because we know people want to get started. People want to start using AI. People want to start seeing the benefit, and they're expecting to see benefit pretty quickly. I believe that what's holding the industrial space, the industrial AI space back, is the fact that everyone is doing huge, massive, insane contracts. They're saying, let's talk about some implementation process that's going to be taking us 5 months for us to first clean up your data, and then let's go and do it through this entire system of plugging it in, and then we got to do all these connections. There's so many ways to get started quicker. And then obviously, as the relationship grows and as your data grows and as things grow, we've built Folio in a way to expand, to allow those massive contracts. But I believe we're in a place right now, it's at our fingertips. Why do we make it so complicated? Let's get it to your guys. Let's get it started. And so we're building to just hop and play, get started, pay for it like you're paying for your other software subscriptions. Don't start talking about a huge, massive AI strategy that's going to take 2 years to implement. Let's just get this shit done. Let's help your guys that are struggling in the field. There's already 600,000 jobs in the US that are missing in the manufacturing space. Why are we taking so long in order to just start optimizing the guys that are already there? Why is it taking us so many thinking and so many back and forth conversations? Let's just get started and let's see how it goes from there. And that's why we're building Folio the way it is. You can pay for it month to month. You can come in, get started, dump your data sheets, see the value, rock and roll. And then we can start talking about big contracts if necessary. Let's just get started.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, in as much as AI, is especially your solution is a no-brainer, but they still have a lot of manufacturers who are sort of like sitting on the fence on whether they should adopt it or not, for reasons that are maybe not so much about the technology itself, but the cultural or change management barriers. What do you have to say to leaders, or maybe who want to get executive buying, how to sort of like sell this solution, and in light of these cultural challenges that may exist within the company, where some people don't really want to sort of like change?
Do you use Netflix?
Yes.
Do you remember when you used to have to go to a Blockbuster or a Hollywood movie store, and you would go on, like, I don't know, Friday night or Saturday night, and you walk through the aisles, and you would go and you would sit there and find a movie, and you'd look at the back and you'd rent the DVD, and you'd have to remind yourself when you're going to go and return it so you don't get the overdraft fees. And I remember when Netflix came out, and I was just like, but I'm going to miss going to Blockbuster, and like, but how do I know if this is a movie that I want? What do you mean I don't have to return it? And now when you think about it, you're just like, there's no way that you would want to go get in your car, drive on a Friday night to a movie store to go pick up a movie, and you only get to take home 3. I think that's the way we need to be looking at AI. We need to be looking at it and say, of course, we're used to doing things a certain way, and we like the way that we've been doing things. It's worked enough. And that's what it was with us, with movies. It's like, well, I like Blockbuster. I like going to these movie stores and going and buying things, and then, spending an unnecessary amount of money on the candy at the checkout aisle and then coming home. But once we had Netflix, and it's starting, and it's there at your fingertips, it's there on your computer, your entire way of interacting with the exact same information. It's the same movie, right? It's the same movie that you would be able to pick, but this one is just there at your fingertips. It's smarter, it's cheaper, it's easier, there's less overhead. You're less worried necessarily now about when you need a return. That's what I feel about AI. And I think if we think about AI and it's might be counterintuitive. I think if any average person thinks about it and they say, do I want to have to go through and sort through 700 pages of documentation to find my answer? Or do I wish I had an assistant that I can hand that off to and say, just find me the answer within 2 seconds, and they actually do it for me? You would very much just have an assistant do that. And so I think that's really how we're thinking about AI. Think about what you wish you had. You have the opportunity to have that. Let's go ahead and get started. And especially since it's not a large undertaking, especially since you don't have to open yourself up to or open up all your data or open up all your information, especially with Folio. Again, we're not plugging into your machines. We're just here to optimize your existing systems, your existing products. Netflix is so much better than going in and having to trudge through the snow to find your movie.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So to kind of like close this conversation, so I typically ask my guests to give us a sort of like a projection of where they see AI in manufacturing going the next few years or so. um what are you most excited about in the coming months or years? I mean, things are just moving so fast right now, it's really hard to even do a projection 3 5 years out. What are you most excited about, what's happening in the space of AI?
It's interesting because whenever I speak to partners or investors or folks about that fact that I'm building for the industrial manufacturing space, the first thing they say is like, "Oh, that's a hard and very old school industry." And then it bothers me because industrials are the most modern. When you look at a modern manufacturing plant, you've got robotics, you've got every single brilliant system plugged together, you've got everything working somehow. You have what I feel is the most modern experience ever, but you still have the back office and the folks that are expected to sell these products, the folks that are expected to engage with these products that are still stuck in old ERPs, old Excels, old experiences. And so my vision and what I see in the industrial space with AI is that AI will continue to rise and succeed on the physical AI level in terms of the actual manufacturing plant. And at the same time, AI on the knowledge side level, this is where Folio is, we're building for the knowledge workers in the industrial space, will also continue to rise so that there's an even playing field. Your incredible, brilliant, incredible products that you are creating and producing, these data centers that you're optimizing, these semiconductors, these defense, these, all of these energy components that you're building that are the most modern, the most high-end products are actually then sold and used and engaged and supported by teams that are actually also supported by the most high-end products on the software side. And so that's really where I'm seeing things. And we know that in the AI is moving towards not just having the ability to be a co-pilot, which is where Folio is starting. We're starting as a co-pilot. We have agents and doing it. What we're really seeing and how we're building in for the future of Folio is building autonomous commerce experience, right? In the end of the day, people shouldn't even having to engage or ask too many questions. AI will be able to understand the holistic experience and just do some of those actions on its own, and will be able to even sell, support, etc., and really be a hand to these OEMs and these distributors, in order to fill the gap that so many of these companies feel. And I think especially as products become more and more and more technical, you're going to have to use AI in order to understand the technical complexities of it. And so I really see us moving very, very deeply into that space, and continue to build AI for the modern needs that a modern manufacturing company actually has.
Awesome. Yeah, so we will definitely provide links to your website and all the relevant material in the description of this video, and also on all the podcast platforms. But before we end this session, is there anything else you want to say to our audience, something that we may have missed in this conversation?
No, I really think, we're ready to get started. I think it's we build this concept in our heads, and I see it a lot at the trade shows, is that it's build your AI strategy, how to strategize with AI. And strategy is really important, but nothing beats just trying, just going, just getting started. I think we see all of the progress in the world is just by someone being brave enough and saying, this will 10x my life. this will 100x my life. Let me test it out. Let me go ahead and do that. And so I think that's really what I would just say is like, we've recognized that, and we're building for the folks that are wanting to go ahead and just 10x their day-to-day day. And I'm available to chat with anybody, basically.
Awesome stuff. Faye, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show and share your insights with us. I really found it insightful, and I'm sure our audience also have enjoyed this conversation and find it useful. So again, thank you so much for taking the time today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.